All right, welcome to Section 3. This is Analysis and Meaning Making, Part 1. So, what we've done is we've talked about what a text is, how that text operates in trying to give meaning. Now we kind of shift to a more audience-centered reception lecture in which we're looking at how do people receive meaning? How do people try to make meaning? And when they make meaning, how do they try to analyze that meaning? So how do you, in terms of like media studies and media theory, how do you attempt to analyze and talk about a message, a media text, in such a way that you can kind of share how you've made meaning out of it? So kind of more of an academic pursuit here, but also just kind of it's not purely academic. People talk about these messages and their understanding of it, and you know, it's discussion that we have amongst each other. And so we're going to talk about different ways that you can do an analysis of this stuff. And there are different kind of methodologies, different ways you can go through this. So we can talk about analyses in a lot of different ways, but two of the more common ways that we talk about types of analyses are either qualitative or quantitative analyses. So that kind of means exactly what the root words are there, quality versus quantity. Not that one is better than the other, they're just different approaches. So, for example, if we were doing a quantitative analysis, we would be looking at numbers, applying statistics, figuring out numerical trends, looking at a media text and putting a more rigid kind of measurement system onto it. For example, we'll talk about content analysis as a part of quantitative analysis, and that's where we're simply counting the number of times we see something or witness something in a media text, and then drawing conclusions from those numbers. But today we're going to talk about qualitative, which instead of looking at sheer quantity and counting a massive number of things, qualitative tends to be more in depth. It tends to look at something with a very focused eye. And so you're looking at in-depth explanation of the content and the implications of them. So you can be extremely detailed. In other words, instead of kind of looking at the media text globally, in other words, just kind of looking at the big picture, qualitative analyses tend to be very specific. And so it really is coming more from one person's point of view as the person that's doing the analysis, rather than trying to make it more objective. In a quantitative analysis, when you're counting things, one of the big things is involved in that is, let's say we're watching a movie and I want to count the number of fight scenes that we have. You hope that if I'm watching a movie and I come up with a number that represents the number of fight scenes, if someone else was to watch that movie, they would come up with the same number. Thus, that's supposedly an objective measure, right? I can say that this happened so many times, and hopefully another person who's looking at the media text can say that they confirm it did happen that many times. Qualitative tends to be more subjective. We're looking at very specific items, and so and we're analyzing things in a very in-depth and explanatory kind of way, and so it can be more subjective, right? It can be, well, here's how I viewed this text. Here's how I made sense of this scene in the movie, or made sense of this song on an album. So it's more subjective. That way, sometimes you can come up with an analysis of something and other people say, yeah, I didn't get that. That's not what I saw. I didn't look at it that way. So some criticisms of a qualitative analysis is that it can kind of lack a systemized way of being verified by others. In other words, I can say, well, here's what I got out of the piece, but you may get something totally different, right? It also means it can be culturally relevant. So, my background and my cultural upbringing can provide me a different level of analysis than someone with a totally different cultural background, right? So, let's just think about common products, right? What Coca-Cola means to me as an American is going to be very different to a Russian trying to describe what Coca-Cola is, right? There's a certain level of patriotism almost behind Coca-Cola, right? It's this great American product. Well, other countries, other cultures might not view it in the same way. So, one of the types of semiotic analysis or analyses that we can do, or one of the types of qualitative analyses, rather, that we can do is a semiotic analysis, which is based off of semiology. What is semiology? That's the textual meaning generated through the arrangement of signs. Semiology is just the study of signs, okay? A lot of our world operates through signs. We come to know our world through signs. So things that are provided to us that on the face of it may not have that meaning, because they're signs, they're symbols, they provide meaning to us. And when I say a sign, I don't necessarily mean, a very literal road sign. Lots of different things can be signs. Language can be signs, right? So, pardon me. What a sign consists of is the signifier and the signified. The signifier being the means of representation, and the signified is the concept that is represented. So, in other words, if we look at this right here, this is the signifier. It's just a picture, right? It's a picture of Uncle Sam. So that's the signifier, the actual item, right? The picture itself. Now, the signified is whatever Uncle Sam and this photo means to you. When I look at it, I see America, I see patriotism, I see duty to country, I see sacrifice, I see kind of some impending doom too, because this was a photo that was used for military recruitment in World War II. So when I say a sense of doom, what I mean is, this gets tied to war quite often. That you're needed to join the Army, Navy, military, so you can go fight the evil overseas, right? So it has a loaded, very loaded, some people may see this and think of, America as a democracy and do your part by going to vote or something like that. People can get different things out of it. The signified from this can be different depending on the person. Now, we take a signifier and we take a signified, and combined, those give us our sign. So a sign is the relationship or the duality, the coming together of both the signifier and the signified. So when we see this and have an immediate reaction to it, that's us creating a sign. That's us putting signifier and signified together. For example, this symbol right here, which is the Christian symbol. It's the fish, right? So this is a religious symbol. Now, if I look at this, it's really just two lines that cross over, or two arcs rather, that cross over one another. But it has a different meaning than just that. So while this is a signifier, and someone may look at it and go, oh, it kind of looks like a fish, the signified to many people is that it's a symbol for Christianity. And of course, most of us know this symbol because it was a popular thing to put on the back of your car, like a little a symbol that people would put on the back of their car. So it also has kind of another meaning in that this not only means Christ and Christianity, it also is an indicator that the person who's carrying it is a Christian. Right? So it's making a claim about somebody as well. Language can serve as a sign, very much so. If you think about the arrangement of letters, for example, the word chair, C-H-A-I-R. This is just an arrangement of letters, right? But with our background in English as language, we know what this means when we put all those letters together. We get a physical image in our mind, a mental image of chair. What a chair is, what a chair does, how a chair operates, right? That's very much a sign. But we could, if we had a Spanish background, we would have different letters that gave us the same concept, right? So language can very much so be a sign. And you also kind of see in that the cultural relevance, how cultural relevance comes into play. If I don't speak any English, if I am Spanish background and I don't know anything English, this doesn't mean an actual chair to me. It's just a combination of letters. Likewise, if I don't know any Spanish and you give me the word for chair in Spanish, I see letters, but I don't really know what that means because my cultural upbringing, my use of language is different based on cultural items. So signs can have a different level of arbitrariness, right? So we can talk about signs that it's really hard to kind of come up with their meaning, and then some that are very obvious, right? Icons, for example, are signs for which there's a physical resemblance. So when you see the signifier, it looks exactly like the signified, right? That's an icon. So if I get this right here, which is a person on top of these wavy lines, but also inside those wavy lines, it looks to us like a person swimming. So this symbol tells us something about swimming. Maybe you put it outside of a area on a lake. And so people see this sign and they go, okay, swimming must be permitted right here in this area. They put a sign to say so. Or if you're trying to print something, computer icons, right, are very literal. So if I'm trying to find where the printer is on my computer, or where the software is that allows me to change things on the printer, I can see this icon right here. It looks like a piece of paper going through and being printed on. It's a very literal thing. There's really no arbitrariness much at all in this. Something that's a little bit more arbitrary could be an index. And in this example, you would think indices, but it's indexes, really, the way that semiotics uses this. So what an index is there's no physical resemblance, but there's a corresponding association, right? So we tend to see things like if we see smoke, we automatically think somewhere there's a fire. If we see someone crying, we kind of automatically think that person is sad. If we see something shaking, like an animal shaking, or a person's hands shaking, we think, well, that person is nervous. We may also think that thing or person is cold, right? So I have some pictures here that can be considered indexes. For example, this right here. This shows us what looks like a drop, okay, like a drop of water, and then we see these wavy lines above. So, what is the association there? It could be that this is hot water, right? Or steam. Steam is present. Some people have even looked at this and thought that this was a flame and this was hot. So whatever we're talking about, we look at this picture and we think, oh, there's heat, right? And if they're showing us that there's heat here, it's probably dangerous heat. So that's an index. You see this symbol on the side of the road. Does it mean that somewhere there's a deer standing on hind legs? No. In this sense, we see a yellow sign, which typically means caution when we're driving. And you see this deer. And the association is there may be deer crossing the road in front of you. Be careful not to hit them. Okay, look out for them. So the association is pay attention to your surroundings when driving, right? And then we have totally arbitrary things that really there's no connection whatsoever, but we are taught what it means, okay? So, for example, when we see this red octagon, most of us are going to think stop sign, stop doing whatever you're doing, okay? It's just a red octagon. I mean, there's nothing inherent about it that says you need to stop. When we see this symbol right here, a lot of us know this as biohazard. But it's kind of a strange symbol. There's really nothing in here that tells you, okay, whatever this thing is, don't get near it. Don't touch it. Don't try to breathe it in, because this thing is dangerous to your body, right? Again, we're taught that. That's what that symbol means. There's nothing inherent in this that tells us. Even a common road sign sometimes can be a symbol and totally arbitrary. Think of it this way. If you were driving around, and let's say you've never driven a car. Let's say that I pull you out of a North Korean prison camp, and you've never driven a car, and you've never seen road signs. You have been locked away, or maybe you're a hermit that's lived in a cave. You just don't have experience with these things, and on the side of the road you see this, right? You see this symbol. You don't know why is there blue. You don't know why there is red, right? But we see that the colors are red, white, and the numbers, and blue. And if we think red, white, and blue, we typically think United States or America. But if you've never seen those things, you don't know that. Also, you don't know what this 80 means. Does this mean I'm driving on Highway 80? Does it mean the speed limit here is 80? Does it mean there's 80 miles to my destination? Of course, we kind of have an idea because we're American drivers. We know what this means. But imagine that you're not an American driver. You've never driven a car and you've never been to America. This really has no inherent meaning to you. Therefore, it's totally arbitrary. And when we look at how we get meaning out of these signs, we have to consider that there's always denotation and connotation. Denotation is, and a lot of it is like signifier and signified. Denotation is the interpretation of what is represented at its most basic level. It's immediate, literal, and obvious. Okay? Connotation is the second order associative meaning. In other words, what's really being said. So you can look at somebody's message or something that someone's written to you and go, okay, and sarcasm is a really good example of this. You know, if you have someone says something, could your room be any more nasty? And so if you look at that, just from a denotation standpoint, you look at that sentence, could my room be any more nasty? And you think, well, yes, of course it could. I could make it much more nasty. But what the connotation there is, the person that's saying that's using sarcasm, what the person's really saying is, you need to clean this up, right? It's not a question of, hey, I wonder how nasty you can make this place. What's really being said is, when are you going to clean this up? And so that sarcasm works, right? It's culturally specific, though. If you try to use that same phrase, say in, I don't know, a South American jungle to somebody, they're not going to understand the use of sarcasm in your English statement, right? They may think that you're actually asking them, hey, is it possible to make this place nastier? So there's culturally specific things going on there too. The reason why I have this picture here is, and I may ask you about this in class, but this is a connotation, denotation kind of thing. The denotation here is that I just have a picture of this person, right? Just a picture. But I'm presenting this to you. If I ask you, just off the top of your head, who do you think this guy is? You know, he's a fictional person. Let's say he's a fictional character. And if you try to come up in your head with, okay, well, who is he? What does he do? What's his job? What's his hobbies and interests? If you try to come up with an explanation behind him or a storyline behind him, that's the connotation. Okay? You've taken something that you've literally seen, and now you're trying to make second order meaning or associative meaning, right? Stereotypes very much work off of connotation, right? But they're culturally specific. They're also polysemic. When I look at this guy and I tell you who he is and what he does, my understanding of it could be very different than your understanding of it. Maybe I don't put a lot of value in people, guys especially, who wear suspenders, have lots of tattoos and earrings. Maybe I look at that guy and I think he's a pretender. He's a hipster. But maybe there's a woman or a man out there that is kind of physically attracted to someone like this. Someone who has lots of tats and kind of looks mysterious and whatever. So what I come away with from this photo can be very different than what someone else does. Polysemic just means there's multiple meanings possible. Like we could get very different but numerous kind of meanings from something. Another example that I use of denotation and connotation is one of the things that Trump said when campaigning. This goes back to Trump and Megyn Kelly, who was a host at Fox News at that time, in a debate, and Megyn Kelly was asking very pointed questions towards Donald Trump, and she wasn't giving him much leeway at all to kind of meander. She wanted a straight answer. And you could tell she was getting frustrated because she was not getting a straight answer. And so later, when asked about that kind of back and forth relationship during that debate when Trump was speaking to Don Lemon from CNN. He was talking about Megyn Kelly, and he said, well, she gets out and she starts asking me all sorts of ridiculous questions. And you could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her, wherever. So who knows what Trump really meant by that? We know the denotation here. He's saying you could see there was, she got out there, she asked me ridiculous questions. And she was getting upset so much that you could almost see the blood in her eyes, and blood coming out of, wherever there was blood coming out. So many people took that as a connotation, the part that says blood coming out of wherever, they took that as a slam on her sex, right? On the fact that she was a female. And people said, is he trying to say that she was being, bitchy and mean because she was having her period? Blood coming out of wherever? And so that connotation, that caused kind of a stir, a controversy. And that's what's going on there with denotation and connotation. So we can talk about how you kind of perform analysis or analyses when you're looking at these signs in two different ways, and I'll give you two quick examples, and we can discuss these examples in class. But one way to look at it is as a paradigmatic analysis or a syntagmatic analysis. So a syntam is just a collection of signs that are interacting together to generate meaning. So both of these things, paradigmatic and a syntagmatic analysis, really do depend on a person analyzing the syntam, right? How these things come together. So it's probably best to talk about these in reverse, right? So a syntagmatic analysis is when you look at the ways in which different signs in a text interact with one another, and how using sign after sign after sign after sign kind of gives you a bigger understanding or a bigger meaning. So you're analyzing all of the signs together. One way we can do that is to look at the opening credits for Law and Order. So if we're looking at the opening credits for Law and Order, for example, we see lots of crime here. We see scenes of people being arrested. We see men in a blue background. Blues is often associated with the police. We see mug shots, people being arrested, people in a jail cell, handcuffs, right? Then we switch over to the word order, and we see something about America, now a courtroom, defendants, gavels, scales of justice, red as a background change. So we know these people are different than the first people. And again, the connotation there is that this is a show about police officers and lawyers, right? It's taking place in the city. It's nighttime. Crime is more likely sometimes at night, whatever. But what that does is that when we take a look at all those little signs put together, all the signs talking about being arrested, committing crime, and then look at all the signs about the justice system, we come to an understanding that this show is going to be about that process, about capturing and arresting criminals and putting them on trial. And indeed, that is what Law and Order is all about. So the other side to that is a paradigmatic analysis. Paradigmatic analysis is when you're looking at all those signs put together, right? But you see something that does not fit the paradigm. It does not fit what the other things are doing. It stands out. You're comparing signifiers that were used as compared to alternative signifiers, right? It's something that stands out. It breaks the paradigm. It breaks what's going on. Now, as an example of that, I like to use this clip. This is a scene from Schindler's List, and we can describe what Schindler's List is in class. You see the Nazi symbol on his coat. This is a period piece about, based on a true story that took place in Germany during World War II. And what you're seeing here is the ransacking of a Jewish ghetto. These people are being rounded up and either executed on site or put on the train to go to the camp, prison camp. And you can already see what the paradigmatic shift is right there. This is all in black and white, except for what you just saw. A little girl in a red dress. There she is right there in her dress. So we're looking at all this stuff that's happening. It was quite violent. It was quite harsh. But it's all in black and white except for this little girl. I have a scene where, talk about the cruelty of war, the Nazis are trying to save ammunition. So when they kill these people, they shoot them in a single file line, save on bullets. So this couple that's looking, this is Oskar Schindler. He's actually a war profiteer. He builds weapons and tanks and things that you would need for a war, and he's making a great deal of money right now. And you can kind of see that he was transfixed on this little girl. And something is really eating at his soul about this whole thing. The little girl gets up to her room, and then she crawls up under the bed to hide, and all of a sudden her red coat is no longer red. And for the first time in this scene, she seems scared. And so, in a paradigmatic analysis, you ask yourself, why? Why was that little girl in a red coat? Why was color used in that instance when everything else was black and white? And we'll talk about that some in class, what your ideas are about that. So last slide. What are the what are the limitations of semiology? So we can use semiology definitely as and semiotic analysis to look at media texts. But what's going to be some problems with it? Well, first of all, it is subjective, right? And it is polysemic. So, for example, I ask one of you in class, what does the red coat mean? You're going to give me one answer. And that answer is because you're coming up with it. You're thinking about it. You analyzed it. You have a response, right? But someone else in class to your side may say, well, no, that's not how I read this coat. When I looked at the red coat, I thought it meant this, as opposed to what the person just said before me. So it depends on who you are. And it means that these signs can have many meanings. They're polysemic. Okay? It's also intertextual. So sometimes you may see a sign or something in a show, and you, or in a TV show or a movie or something like that, and you know that it's drawing reference to something else. This is what, again, intertextuality means, is that one text can be understood or needs to be understood by the relationship to another text. Right? So if you have that familiarity, if you're watching something like Family Guy, which has a lot of 1990s pop culture in it, if you're watching that show and there's a reference to some kind of 90s pop culture, well, if you're my age, you get it. You see that joke, and that joke kind of helps you make meaning out of the situation. But if you're 20 years younger than me, or you're 30 years older, because you don't have those references, you may not see that thing in the same way. You may analyze it differently because you don't have that familiarity. So that's what I mean by it's intertextual, and how sometimes intertextuality can be a limitation. Because if I'm looking at something and I get a meaning and I have to explain that meaning to you, but you don't have the context, you don't have the background, it's very hard for you to agree with the meaning that I came up with. Right? So it's very personal. And that indeed is kind of a hallmark of qualitative analysis. It is a very thought out, involved process, yes. It's a very valid way of analyzing things. But it is very person specific in that you're looking at how one person analyzes something, right? So that's all I have for you today. Thank you for paying attention, and I will see you in class soon.